We don't want people to live without wonder or mystery, and in fact we thoroughly recommend. Take a look through the Hubble telescope. See if you can get over what you see, the unbelievable beauty and symmetry and majesty of what you'll see. And you want to exchange this for the burning bush? I don't think you will once you've done it. Read a page of Stephen Hawking on the event horizon, for example, and see if that isn't awe-inspiring enough for anybody. And you're seeing there the future of a potentially much more noble and ennobled and enlightened and emancipated humanity, where none of these discoveries and none of this awe and majesty requires that you kill anyone in the name of some man-made idol or god or superstition. For heaven's sake, let's get this.
He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was.
Let me just, as it were, fill in some of those latent blanks. In Belfast, the capital city of one of the provinces of this, our United Kingdom, as everybody here knows, everything, culturally, educationally, economically, politically, socially, has been very gravely retarded for at least a quarter of a century. At least half a century and maybe more since partition, and before that, because partition is both the outcome and the cause of sectarian warfare in this town, by the simple fact that there are people there who are willing to kill not just one another, but one another's children on the basis of what kind of Christian they are. Horrible things are done, not just in pubs and clubs, but on the streets, on housing estates, on university campuses in that city still, despite the relatively good news we've had today, where the situation remains dominated by barbaric sectarian party leaders, on this and no other basis. Both churches demand that their children are sent to separate schools. They each agree with the other that above all things, their own children must be protected from the faith of another faith. I don't think I need to elaborate very much more on how horrendous the consequences of that have been and how they are enshrined, by the way, in our own constitution, which mandates that our own head of the church is also the head of the state and of the armed forces, with all the ludicrous Windsor consequences that you get if you found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII. These conditions, which are farcical in England, Wales, and Scotland, are tragic and ugly, only a few minutes flying time from where we sit. If I pass on from Belfast to, say, Baghdad, where I've recently been, and without reopening any of the arguments about the rightness or otherwise of the coalition intervention in Mesopotamia, I think it can be granted by any fair-minded person that what was most needed in Iraq after 30 years of fascism and war was a period of reflection, a short interlude of calm, during which Iraqis could look about themselves and decide perhaps for whom they'd like to vote, perhaps what kind of country they'd like to live in, what kind of federal system they might wish to evolve, and to do so unmolested by violence or terror. The parties of God have vetoed every hope of that process. The parties of God now have the Iraqi people in their jaws, and they're saying to them, it's not enough just to kill foreigners or to rail against Jews or Christians or secularists. That's nothing like enough. It's only in Iraq, not only, mainly, chiefly in Iraq, that it's considered perfectly all right, in fact, a religious duty to blow up the mosques, to destroy the religious schools of other Muslims, of the Muslims of another school, not unlike the pattern of Belfast. It's not enough to have faith, you must have the right version of your own faith, or risk death, mutilation, and humiliation, and the destruction, the immiseration, the torture of Iraqi society is something that all of us can read about every day. Suppose we're to go to Beirut, the pearl of the Levant, the most civilized and beautiful and cultured city of the Middle East and to see what happens when, for politicized reasons, a sectarian constitution is in place which says that the president of Lebanon must always be a Maronite Christian, that the speaker of its parliament must always be a Shia, that its vice president must always be a Sunni, that the Druze must have their share, and so on, leaving out at the very bottom, I'm afraid, such forces as Kurds and Armenians, but making everyone defined in their citizenship by their faith. Do I need to elaborate what that's done to retard, to bankrupt, to beggar, to disfigure, and to degrade what could have been an ideally plural and diverse and happy society? Remaining with letter B, shall I say Banja Luka? Shall I say Belgrade? Or just say Bosnia? Again, one of the most civilized enclaves of the Balkans for many years, protected by a secular constitution and the remains of what had been a secular and democratic republic. And just look what happens when it is decided that it is a matter of faith that determines your citizenship, your allegiance, your identity, your nature, your rights. See the recrudescence in the Europe of the late 20th and early 21st century of Catholic fascist parties we thought we'd left behind at Nuremberg, the Ustasha. The recrudescence of forces like the Chetniks, the Serbian Orthodox fascists who took exactly the same view except the other way around. See the craven way in which our spineless media, which always defers to people of faith, say that it was Serbs who shelled Sarajevo or Croats who shelled Mostar, when what they should have been saying was, today the Christian Orthodox militia bombarded an open city around the clock, or yesterday the Catholic forces shelled Mostar from dawn till dusk. They didn't do it because it's a matter of taste. We're supposed to respect people of faith, and we're supposed to respect them while they do that and do that and make this sort of excuse. There aren't enough words, in my lexicon at any rate, to express the contempt that I think any right-thinking person must feel for this conscription of this kind of medieval
Religious identity has often been used as a weapon, not a source of peace. The conflict in Belfast that Hitchens mentions wasn't really about faith in God. It was about power, control, and segregation justified through religion. Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland fought for decades, each claiming divine legitimacy, yet both worshipped the same God. That alone shows how belief divides more than it unites. The same pattern appears in Iraq, where Sunni and Shia Muslims, branches of the same religion, turn on each other in holy war. And in Lebanon, political offices are still divided by faith, forcing people to identify religiously rather than simply as citizens. Whenever society defines rights or belonging by religion, the result is discrimination and violence. History keeps proving that secular governance is safer and more stable. In Europe, the Enlightenment and separation of church and state reduced bloodshed and expanded freedom. When laws come from reason and human rights instead of scripture, everyone can live equally, regardless of belief. Religion keeps promising peace, but too often delivers conflict, because faith divides where evidence and empathy could unite.
Religion is the root of quite a lot of evil, but that didn't make for a very catchy title. I just want to briefly reply to Dr. Spivey a couple of points. He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere. He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like. or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony. Now, I suppose that apologists for religion would be likely to put forward 4 reasons for believing it to be a good thing, 4 things that religion does for us, and I call them explanation, exhortation, meaning morals, explanation meaning explaining the world, where we come from, where the universe comes from, and so on, exhortation, what is good, what is bad, inspiration, and consolation. And I think my colleague Anthony Grayling is likely to cover some aspects of exhortation. I shall be brief on that, therefore. Consolation, I often encounter people who say, but if you take religion away from people, how are they going to survive? How are they going to manage when they're bereaved, or when they lose a loved one, when they fear death themselves? And it's a reasonable point. It is certainly possible to obtain consolation from a lie. Many people will say, if you ask them, would you like your doctor to tell you when you have a mortal illness and you're only going to live another 6 months? There are people who will say, no, I would rather my doctor lied to me. And that's fine. And I would respect that wish if I were a doctor, if I thought that a patient wanted to be lied to. But I don't think it's a very dignified, general reason for supporting religion that it supplies consolation, unless, of course, it's true. And we haven't time to go into it, but I think there are very, very good reasons for thinking that there is absolutely no grounds for believing that there's any actual truth in the claims of religion. So those who gain consolation from religion, I must confess that I rather liken it to a child with a dummy in its mouth. I don't think it's a very dignified, a very respect-worthy posture for an adult to go around sucking a dummy with a comforter, which is what I think it essentially is. Inspiration, well, I've always found the inspiration, the heavens declare the glory of God, all things bright and beautiful, and so on, to be paltry, parochial, small-minded, compared to the inspiration that you can get by looking at the world of science. Deep space, deep time, as the late Carl Sagan showed us. Deep complexity in the study of life. The scientific study of these profound, beautiful, elegant mysteries is one of the greatest achievements of the human spirit. And insofar as religion offers an alternative or even positively stands in the way of scientific activity, then I think we would be well rid of it.
When Dawkins says religion isn't part of human nature, he's reminding us that belief isn't genetic, it's cultural. Children aren't born Christian, Muslim, or Hindu. They're taught those identities before they're old enough to question them. Studies in developmental psychology show that kids naturally ask why, but belief systems shape how those questions are answered. He's also right that religion has held a monopoly on art and power for centuries because the church controlled the money. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel not because faith inspired him, but because the church paid him. If scientific institutions had the same funding, our greatest art might have celebrated discovery, not dogma. When Dawkins compares religious consolation to a child's comforter, he's pointing out that comfort doesn't make something true. People believed the earth was the center of the universe for thousands of years because it felt comforting, but science proved otherwise. The same applies to heaven and divine purpose.
We don't want people to live without wonder or mystery, and in fact we thoroughly recommend. Take a look through the Hubble telescope. See if you can get over what you see, the unbelievable beauty. and symmetry and majesty of what you'll see. And you want to exchange this for the burning bush? I don't think you will once you've done it. Read a page of Stephen Hawking on the event horizon, for example, and see if that isn't awe-inspiring enough for anybody. And you're seeing there the future of a potentially much more noble and ennobled and enlightened and emancipated humanity, where none of these discoveries and none of this awe and majesty requires that you kill anyone in the name of some man-made idol or god or superstition. For heaven's sake, let's get this out of the way.
Roger.
I think that there is a real question as to what transcendence is and what its place is in the experience of all of us. Christopher Hitchens just referred to the burning bush. The voice that spoke from that bush said, "I am that I am." It reminded us of this very peculiar word which all of us use, the word I, which doesn't identify any material object in the world in which we are situated, but nor does it identify any object out of that world. Just what does it mean? What is it to look at somebody, into somebody's eyes and see the other eye that's looking out at you? That is an experience of transcendence in itself. It is the raw material from which all religious faith is constructed. And it is part of the metaphysical obscurity and unintelligibility of our predicament that we're all faced with this experience every day. And religion makes sense of it for many people. Even for those who don't have religion, that experience is still there.
I have to move on quickly. The final two questions, one up there and one here. And then we have to have the revote and a summary from each of the speakers. So going to have the questioner from up there, please.
Good evening. Question for Richard Dawkins and and Christopher Hitchens. By what measure do you conclude fact, and does Darwinism satisfy that measure? In other words, how do you protect yourself from deception, and how did Darwinism or evolution pass that filter?
Fine. You taking that on board? This question here?
Yes, I'm from the National Secular Society, and I'd like to ask the opponents of the motion whether they think that life for women and homosexuals would have been better or worse without religion.
Fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Fine. A question about the measure. The measure. I wasn't quite sure what the big was.
Fact.
Yes.
The measure of the factuality of evolution is the same as in any other science. Some of the things that scientists have found are found with great confidence. Scientists are always open to the possibility of being proved wrong at some point in the future, but there are some things that seem at any one stage in history far better demonstrated than others. The fact of evolution is about as well demonstrated as anything we know. It is absolutely certain by the normal standards, the same kind of standards as we are certain that the Earth rotates and the Sun doesn't go around the Earth. Formally we have to say, well, that's a hypothesis that might one day be disproved, but we all know that it won't be. And evolution has now come into that category. I don't mean that Darwin's theory of natural selection, at least as the only driving force of evolution, that probably should be treated as slightly more uncertain, but the fact of evolution itself, by which I mean the fact that all living creatures that have ever been looked at on this planet are cousins sharing a common ancestor, that is as secure a fact as any in science.
And the question,
Only because I was named, because I was asked by name, I feel very tentative to second Professor Dawkins in this area, but I would just remind you of what Carl Sagan said on this, which was, he said that there is no doubt that evolution has occurred. It's in the molecular biological record, it's in the fossil record. There are disputes about how it occurred. The Darwinian theory is only the original one of how that might have taken place. And Darwin himself set out as an original taxonomist in order to prove the truth of Christianity. just as Sir Isaac Newton believed in alchemy and Joseph Priestley, the discoverer of oxygen, believed in the phlogiston theory. We are always ready, all of us on this side, to be self-critical, to have a war within the war among scientists, among those who believe in innovation, evidence, hypotheses, and their testing. But that's entirely different from anything that is based on faith, on the supernatural, or on revelation, all of which belongs to the abject childhood of our species, before these things could even be discussed. There's no contest between the two magisteria, if you like.
The idea that we need religion to experience wonder is false. Modern science has already revealed more mystery and beauty than any holy text ever imagined. The Hubble telescope shows galaxies 13 billion years old. The Bible describes a universe created in 6 days. Physics, chemistry, and cosmology explain origins that Scripture only guessed at. Neuroscience also explains experiences once called spiritual. When people feel awe or transcendence, brain scans show activity in the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, our natural capacity for empathy and imagination, not divine intervention. These sensations are part of human biology, not proof of the supernatural. Even the Bible contradicts itself on fundamental points. Genesis 1 says humans were created after animals, while Genesis 2 reverses the order. Exodus 20 commands, "Thou shalt not kill." Yet in Numbers 31:17-18, Moses orders the killing of boys and non-virgin women. The Gospel accounts disagree on who visited Jesus' tomb and when. If this book were divinely inspired, its author wouldn't contradict himself. Evolution, meanwhile, is supported by overwhelming evidence. DNA comparisons show humans share 98.8% of our genome with chimpanzees. Fossil transitions, from Australopithecus afarensis to Homo habilis to Homo sapiens, form a record no ancient scripture could predict. So when Hitchens and Dawkins reject faith as a source of truth, they're not rejecting meaning, they're rejecting misinformation. Humanity's progress has always come from questioning, not worship. Would we be better off without religion? History and science suggest we'd be freer to seek truth without fear. If you found this commentary thought-provoking, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Do you think morality, beauty, and wonder can stand without God?